and can be watched on the City of Brantford's YouTube page now, live or anytime following tonight's meeting. We thank you for your interest in the 3 Grand River Crossings Environmental Assessment Project, and thank you to everybody who submitted questions and comments to the project page. We will be addressing many of those questions and comments that were received this evening. My name is Gagan Batra, and I am the city's project manager on the 3 Grand River Crossings Environmental Assessment Project. With me today are Jack Turner, the consultant project manager, and Danya Shehab, also from GM Blue Plan, the consultant for this project. The purpose of this information session is to present information about the 3 Grand River Crossings Environmental Assessment Project, including where we are in the process, the studies that have been completed to date, and the various options for each of the 3 bridges, as well as the overall crossing area that were evaluated. This presentation will also provide information about the recommended solution that has been selected for the study area, and provide information about how this option was selected as the most preferred alternative. Following the presentation, we will then open up the floor for questions and comments that were submitted by the public, and at that time, we will be happy to address any of the comments that we have received to date. I will now turn it over to Jack Turner to deliver the presentation. Jack.
New here. All right, thanks, Gagan. Welcome to the City of Brantford. Oh, I gotta share here. There we go. Believe we able to see that? Perfect. All right. Welcome to the City of Brantford 3 Grand River Crossings Municipal Class Environmental Assessment Virtual Public Information Center. My name is Jack Turner, the Consultant Project Manager from GM Blue Plan Engineering Limited, and I will be taking you through this presentation tonight. The City of Brantford has initiated this Municipal Class Environmental Assessment, or an MCEA for short, to review alternatives for 3 bridges over the Grand River that are within the study area. As shown, the 3 bridges from north to south are the Lorne Bridge, the Brants Crossing Bridge, and the TH&B Crossing Bridge. The proposed study area extends approximately 200 meters up and downstream of the bridges and to the top of the adjacent river banks. The first Virtual Public Information Center, or PIC for short, was held in the spring of 2020 and introduced the study to stakeholders and the public and to provide opportunities for feedback and comments. The information and videos are available on the project website noted at the bottom of the slide. The purpose of this second PIC is to present a brief summary of the existing conditions, the evaluation completed for the various solutions for each crossing, along with the overall crossing strategy, and present the recommended solution to address the objective of this study. Additionally, this PIC and the comment period to follow will provide opportunities for interested parties to provide comments to the project team. So the 3 Grand River Crossing study is being undertaken as a Schedule B Municipal Class Environmental Assessment, which is a planning process under the Ontario Environmental Assessment Act. The primary goal of the study is to minimize, mitigate, and avoid impacts on the community and surrounding area. Phase 1 of the process is to identify the problem and opportunity. Phase 2 of the process involves completing an inventory of the environment, developing and evaluating feasible alternative solutions, and identifying a recommended solution. We are currently nearing the end of phase 2 with this second PIC. The recommended solutions will be presented in more detail later on in this presentation. Following the second PIC, we will consider feedback received and identify a preferred solution, followed by a presentation to City Council, at which point the project team will review and confirm the choice of the Class EA project schedule. Next, we will review the 3 bridge structures within the study area. So the first is the Lorne Bridge, located on Colborne Street West, and is made of 3 distinct sections. The most easterly section is the Lorne Girder Bridge over the former railway corridor. The middle section is the Lorne Arch Bridge and is the predominant structure that crosses the Grand River. Of the 3 crossings included in this Class EA, the Lorne Bridge is the only one that permits vehicular traffic. The Arch section currently has a 30-ton load limit in the winter months, restricting some truck traffic from utilizing this river crossing. The westerly section of the bridge is the Lauren Bridge pedestrian underpass, which connects the Lauren Park Trail to the Forward View Park Trail underneath Colborne Street West. There are currently no dedicated cycling lanes over the Lauren Bridge. However, there are sidewalks on either side of the road. As identified in various structural evaluations, this structure requires major repairs to maintain as a crossing. The second crossing in the study is the Brants Crossing Bridge. This bridge was built in approximately 1912 to convey railway traffic across the Grand River and has since been converted to carry pedestrian traffic. The structure has been closed since the February 2019 flooding and ice jam event and the subsequent structural inspections. Minor repairs are required to reopen the bridge in the very short term. However, to remain open beyond approximately 3 years, major structural repairs are needed. The southerly crossing in the study is the TH&B Crossing Bridge. This structure was constructed in 1893 as a railway crossing and has since been converted to pedestrian and cyclist use. The structure is also closed following the 2008 flooding event, but was reopened in mid-2018 following the structural inspections. For this structure to remain open beyond approximately 10 to 15 years, major repairs are necessary. In the following slide, we will review the project objectives. This study was initiated to identify long-term solutions that address the deteriorating state of the existing structures and the vehicular and active transportation connectivity needs in the area. The key objectives of the study are to consider a reasonable range of potential solutions, to consider impacts to all aspects of the environment, including the social, natural, technical, and economic environments, and select a preferred solution through a transparent decision-making process that encourages public participation throughout. The problem being studied here is that the structural investigations have identified the need for structural repairs of various magnitudes to each of the 3 Grand River crossings. This study is exploring the feasibility of removing the winter load limit on the Lauren Bridge, the need for one or both of the Brant and TH&B crossing bridges, all based on an assessment of the technical, economic, social, and natural environmental factors, including impact to active transportation network and the risks of future flooding events of the Grand River. The city requires both short-term and long-term plans for the 3 Grand River crossings. Now we will look at a few high-level summaries of various background information studies. On this slide, we can see some of the key archaeological and cultural heritage information. The Stage 1 archaeological assessment identifies areas where a Stage 2 archaeological assessment study would be required if that area may be disrupted by construction. A Stage 2 study confirms if there is likely to be any significant buried archaeological importance. From the figures shown, if foundations were selected to be placed have disturbances in any of the brown or green locations, a Stage 2 archaeological study would be required. This will be reviewed later on in the presentation during discussion and assessment of the various alternatives for each bridge. This slide also illustrates some of the local locations of cultural heritage landscape features, such as the Lauren Park, the Brantford Armory, the Boer War Monument, the Brant County War Memorial, various historical rail lines, the Lake Erie and Northern, or the L-E-N bridge abutments left in place, and the presumed line of Joseph Brant's crossing of the Grand River. On this slide, we will review the study on the natural environment. The Grand River is a significant valley land and regional wildlife corridor. It is home to many wildlife species, including many birds, including the common nighthawk, the eastern wood pewee, and waterfowl, among many others. Additionally, there is habitat in the study area for species of special concern and endangered species, such as the snapping turtle, 3 at-risk bat species, the queen snake, and the chimney swift. We'll now go over some of the more technical conditions, most notably the river hydraulics. So the February 2018 flood and ice jam event may still be fresh in everyone's mind. A hydraulic impact study was completed to assess flooding behavior of the Grand River within the study area for both open water flow in the absence of ice and also ice jamming events. The results of the study found that the Lauren Bridge can convey the various design storms, and they were limited to no hydraulic improvement opportunities. However, as was seen during the 2018 flood event, the Brants Crossing and the THB Crossing bridges are lower than the Lauren Bridge and can become submerged during flood and ice jamming events. Raising the two pedestrian bridges by approximately 0.8 meters will pass the regional storm that is based on Hurricane Hazel that occurred in 1954. However, it should be noted that even raising the bridges do not eliminate the chance of flood damage on the structure. However, it significantly reduces the likelihood. Additionally, raising the structures will not significantly lower flooding events that reach the current side of the bridges. Next, we will review the evaluation framework presented in the first public information presentation. So now that we have described the existing area, we will move on to the next steps and discuss the alternative solutions and the evaluations of those solutions. This slide was presented in the first Public Information Center and describes the evaluation framework for developing, screening, evaluating, and ultimately identifying the recommended solution for all crossings located within the study area. A list of alternative solutions for each crossing was discussed in that first PIC. After receiving feedback from the public and other stakeholders and the completion of all the background studies of the various environments, each individual crossing's alternative solutions were screened for the feasibility to satisfy the study objectives that we reviewed a little bit early in this presentation. From there, a shortlisted individual crossing solutions were combined to create a list of overall crossing strategies for the study area. Each overall crossing strategy was then screened for feasibility against the study's objectives. Finally, a detailed evaluation of each feasible overall crossing strategy was completed, ultimately leading to the selection of the recommended strategy for the 3 Grand River crossings. We're now going to focus on the detailed evaluation and shortlisting of each crossing. The evaluation considered 4 criteria categories, 1 for each of the key environmental environments being assessed, namely the social, the natural, the technical, and the economic environments. Some more specific criteria were reviewed for each category. Each alternative was assessed against each individual criterion using a simple 3-level scale. Green or up arrow represents most beneficial or the least negative potential impacts. Yellow or sideways arrows represent neutral effects or moderate benefit, and red or the down arrow represents least beneficial or the highest potential negative impacts. Alternatives for each crossing were evaluated relative to each other and not in absolute terms. In the interest of time, we will be presenting a summary of the evaluation for each crossings. However, detailed evaluation tables are available for download on the project website. This slide specifically is a summary of the Lauren Bridge evaluation. 2 feasible alternatives were considered for the Lauren Bridge: rehabilitation and replacement. The do-nothing alternative, which is typically included in a Class EA study, would lead to one of the other alternatives in the near term based on the existing condition of the bridge. Closure or removal alternatives were not carried forward to this stage, as Colborne Street West is identified as a major arterial road in the city's official plans and would remove a critical transportation link. Overall, rehabilitation of the Lauren Bridge would have a shorter construction duration and a smaller footprint than replacement, and therefore would also have lower impacts. The cost for rehabilitation would also be much lower than replacement. It would, however, be more technically challenging to rehabilitate the bridge. Based on the evaluation, rehabilitation was shortlisted to be evaluated as a part of the overall crossing strategies for the study area. Moving on to Brants Crossing Bridge, 3 overarching alternatives were considered, namely decommissioning, which would include either closure or removal, rehabilitation, which includes keeping the same height or raising the bridge by 0.8 meters, and finally, replacement. A replacement bridge would be higher than the current structure to improve river hydraulics. Overall, decommissioning Brants Crossing was evaluated to be least favorable. Reasons include loss of connectivity, loss of cultural heritage resources, and other factors. For the Brants Crossing Bridge, the rehabilitation and replacement options were deemed to be the most beneficial with the least negative impact and were carried forward to be evaluated as a part of the overall crossing strategies. The overarching alternatives considered, oh, I missed something here. There we go. Sorry. Moving on to Brants Crossing Bridge, there are three overarching alternatives considered. Decommissioning, which would include either closure or removal. Rehabilitation, which includes keeping the same height. Sorry. Yeah. Bridge would be higher. Okay. So we'll move on to TH&B here. The overarching alternatives considered for TH&B were the same as those for the Brants Crossing, including decommissioning, rehabilitation, and replacement. While the alternatives are similar to the Brant Bridge, it is understood that Brants Crossing is a more favorable crossing over the TH&B because it is in a more favorable location and has more historical value. Because of these differences, the evaluation outcomes are not the same. For TH&B, the shortlisted alternatives focused on rehabilitation. Rehabilitation alternatives pose fewer potential impacts to the social environment and neutral impacts to the natural environment. Technical and economic considerations were similar among most alternatives that were considered. Finally, the Class EA considered the addition of a new crossing as presented on this slide. Overall, both constructing a new crossing and not constructing one would have generally neutral potential impacts to the social and technical environments. However, construction of a new crossing would have high potential impacts to the natural environment and will pose a larger economic impact. Therefore, in this case, the shortlisted alternatives was do not construct a new crossing. Here's the summary of all the individual alternative solutions initially evaluated for each of the river crossing locations, and the results of which each alternative solutions were carried forward to the overall crossing strategy evaluation phase. For the Lorne Bridge, rehabilitation strategy was carried forward while the replacement option was not. The rehabilitation and replacement alternative solutions were carried forward for the Brants Crossing Bridge while the decommissioning options were not. And lastly, for TH&B, only the three rehabilitation options were carried forward. Also, no new pedestrian bridge at a different location will be considered following this. Okay. So part of the economic environment, we also evaluated life cycle costs. These are construction and maintenance costs within a 75-year time frame. For simplicity, the information here focuses on construction costs and does not show general annual maintenance costs, which are much lower in magnitude. This table illustrates large expenditures at key points in the life cycles of each structure as they relate to each alternative. For example, for the Lorne Bridge, the initial capital required would be approximately $8.3 million to rehabilitate it. At 25 years, another $3.7 million would be required to rehabilitate to a lesser degree, and at 50 years, the bridge would need to be replaced. The replacement cost would depend on the style for the new bridge. These life cycle costs were considered in the table on the next slide to determine both the initial capital cost and life cycle cost for different combinations of alternatives. So, after shortlisting alternatives for each bridge crossing, different feasible combinations were developed for potential overall crossing strategies. Of the 9 possible combinations, 5 were identified to be feasible and carried forward to evaluation. As the Lorne Bridge and the new bridge crossing each only had one alternative put forward, the differences between each of the 9 overall crossing strategies are directly linked to the Brants and TH&B crossing bridges. It should be noted that when one pedestrian bridge remains at its current height and not raised, while the other bridge is raised, the benefit to improving ice jamming and river flows is not attained. For this reason, overall crossing strategies 3, 5, and 8 were not carried forward for detailed evaluation. Overall crossing strategy number 9 was not carried forward as the initial capital cost to raise both existing pedestrian bridges was not an efficient use of taxpayer dollars. Additionally, the thought behind replacing Brants Crossing is to consolidate infrastructure investment into one pedestrian and cyclist crossing in the future. Therefore, overall crossing strategies 1, 2, 4, 6, and 7 were carried forward, and their detailed evaluation is shown on this next slide. So this slide shows a summary of the detailed evaluation that was completed for the overall crossing strategy alternatives that were carried forward. Note that the rehabilitation alternative for Lorne Bridge has not been included in this summary since it is the same for all of the strategies shown in the slide. Similarly, for relative comparison purposes, the cost to rehabilitate Lorne Bridge was not included in the economic summaries in this table. The evaluation identified strategy 7 as the recommended solution. Strategy 7 includes rehabilitation of the Lorne Bridge, replacement and raising of the Brants Crossing Bridge, and the rehabilitation with eventual removal of the TH&B Crossing Bridge. This strategy had neutral or moderate potential impacts related to social, natural, and economic environments, and was favorable with respect to the technical environment. Strategies 1, 2, and 4 were very similar with respect to potential benefits or impacts, while strategy 6 was the least favorable. While we've identified strategy 7 as the recommended solution, we note that we are still collecting feedback on these shortlisted overall crossing strategies, so please let us know of any questions or comments that you may have. So in summary, the recommended solution is to rehabilitate Lorne Bridge, replace and raise Brants Crossing Bridge, and complete a minor rehabilitation and eventual removal of the TH&B Crossing Bridge at the end of its useful life. Initial and life cycle cost estimates for each crossing are shown on the slide, as well as the overall crossing, which is estimated to be an initial cost of $12 million and a life cycle cost of approximately $40 million. The rehabilitation of Lorne Bridge would maintain the existing structure while removing the 30-ton winter load limit. At Brants Crossing, the existing steel superstructure would be removed, and the concrete substructure foundations beneath would see major repairs, including adding additional height to account for flooding mitigation. A new steel superstructure would then be installed on the repaired foundation. For the purposes of this study, the new superstructure is being considered to be a prefabricated steel truss that would somewhat, but not exactly, mimic the existing trusses. A staircase and ramp would be required at both the east and west approaches to the bridge to provide access to the raised structure. The rehabilitation at the TH&B Crossing Bridge would involve replacing the existing wood deck, as well as some minor concrete and steel repairs. The estimated service life for the TH&B Crossing Bridge following this minor rehabilitation would be approximately 10 to 15 years. At the end of its useful life, the TH&B Crossing Bridge would be removed. The existing foundations, which include the steel piers and the concrete abutments, would remain in place to minimize disturbances to the natural environment and provide recognition of the current structure. Mitigation measures for cultural heritage and environment would also be explored. For the next few slides, we'll discuss some of the most common questions asked by the public and stakeholders during the first Public Information Center and beyond. So the first question is, can Brants Crossing Bridge be reopened soon? A minor rehabilitation is required in order to reopen the Brants Crossing Bridge in the short term and could occur following the outcome of the environmental assessment. However, more extensive work is required in order to have the bridge remain open beyond approximately 3 to 5 years. Following the conclusion of this study, the City of Brantford would determine if fast-tracking the currently recommended replacement alternative and would it be more desirable than completing the minor repairs that would have limited to no benefit for the new structure. The next 3 questions relate to the river flows and ice jamming. The first question is, what is the history of water or ice levels rising to the underside of the Brants and TH&B Crossing bridges? There are records available back to approximately 1965, where river water gauges indicate that in February of 1996 and February of 2018, the underside of the bridges were submerged. Additionally, there was an event in February 1984, which was very close to or may actually have risen to the underside of the bridges, but lacks any historical verification with news articles or other sorts of documentation. The second river flow question relates to the technical term of return period, used to define the chances of certain severe storms occurring in a given year. What is the 100-year return period event or a 100-year storm or 100-year flood? Do they only occur once in 100 years? A return period represents the likelihood of a storm event occurring in any given year. 100-year return period event has a 1 in 100 chance of occurring regardless of what happened in the prior year. A 50-year return period event has a 1 in 50 chance of occurring each and every year. An everyday example would be the chance of pulling the single red jelly bean from a jar of white jelly beans shown in the picture on the slide. The number of total jelly beans in the jar is equal to the return period event referenced. For a 100-year storm, there would be 100 jelly beans in the jar. The key idea here is that every year a jelly bean is pulled from the jar to determine if a specific return period event would occur. However, once the jelly bean has been drawn out of the jar, it is then placed back in the jar for the draw that occurs in the subsequent year. Third question related to river flows is, would raising Brants Crossing Bridge and TH&B Crossing Bridge eliminate ice jam issues and risks? Raising the two crossings by approximately the 0.8 meters discussed earlier would reduce the probability of ice jamming events occurring at the bridges to less than about 1% in any given year, and would substantially reduce the risk of damage to the bridges in comparison to the current configuration. However, this would do very little to reduce the overall flooding in the area. The last two questions relate to active transportation. The first one here there are concerns with the existing cycling facilities on the Lorne Bridge. Can Lorne Bridge accommodate dedicated cycling lanes without reducing vehicular capacity? Our answer is that the bridge deck was widened during the construction works in the 1980s and cannot be further widened. Adding dedicated cycling lanes to the bridge would come at the expense of reduced vehicular capacity. For instance, there are 5 traffic lanes on the bridge, 2 lanes in each direction, plus 1 left turn lane approaching Brant Avenue. To add a typical 1.5 meter wide cycling lane to each side of the bridge, one of the 5 vehicular lanes would need to be decommissioned. The last of these frequently asked questions that will be discussed today is, there are concerns with the existing shared use trail under the Lorne Bridge on the East River bank. Will the trail be improved or realigned? The trail alignment and connectivity is being investigated by the City of Brantford outside of this municipal class environmental assessment project. We ask for questions related to the trail, please contact the City of Brantford. The process for this public information center is shown on this slide. The notice for this public information center was issued on March 18th. On that same day, the public information center presentation that you've seen here today was also posted to the project website. From April 1st to April 15th, there will be a question and comment period. The questions and comments submitted during this period will be considered for inclusion in a frequently asked questions list with answers that will be posted to the project webpage on April 22nd. Here is a summary of the schedule for the municipal class environmental assessment that have occurred to date and the next steps in the process. The notice of study commencement was issued on March 5th, 2020. Public Information Center was completed from May, the first one was completed from May to July in 2020, and we are currently completing the second PIC. The study is currently anticipated to be completed in the summer of this year. This concludes the live presentation portion of this PIC for the 3 Grand River Crossings Municipal Class Environmental Assessment. If you wish to submit comments or would like to be added to the project stakeholder list, please contact either Gagan Batra, the project manager for the City of Brantford, or myself, Jack Turner, the project manager for GM Blue Plan Engineering. Comment sheets are available on the project website. If you require a paper copy of the comment sheets, please request one from either Gagan or myself. Comments submitted by April 15th will be considered for the frequently asked questions list posted on April 22nd. It is preferred that requests to be added to the stakeholder list be sent by email, and any questions and comments on the PIC material be submitted electronically via the project webpage. However, if this is not possible, providing feedback by phone or mail will be received. Once again, thank you for participating in this virtual presentation, and I will hand it back to Gagan.
Thanks, Jack. We're now going to dedicate the remainder of tonight's live session to questions and answers. So I'll hand it over to my colleague, Maria Visaki, to help us facilitate the Q&A portion of this evening. Maria?
Whoops. Can you hear me now? Thanks, Gagan, and thank you, Jack, for that comprehensive and very informative presentation. As Gagan already mentioned, my name is Maria Visaki. I am the city's Director of Communications and Community Engagement. And I want to thank everyone who's joined us to watch and listen to tonight's public information session regarding this very important initiative for the city of Brantford. We're going to use the remaining time now in tonight's session to address a number of questions about the project that were posted to the city's Let's Talk Brantford online engagement platform. So thank you to everybody for going to the Let's Talk Brantford site and for your interest in this particular project and for engaging with the city with your questions and comments. So we're going to start with a question about the Veterans Memorial Bridge. Why was the Veterans Memorial Bridge, which is only 350 meters from the trail bridge, not included in this study? This bridge is likely 50 years old and appears to need revitalization as well.
I can take that. Thanks, Maria. Great question. This study specifically looks at the 3 Grand River crossings, Lorne, Brants Crossing, and THNB Crossing, because they were the ones that were identified as requiring the most immediate repairs based on structural evaluations that were done at the time. VMP didn't show the same level of structural deterioration, so it wasn't included in the study area. And based on the prior studies, it was mostly Lorne and Brants Crossing Bridge that were in need of the major rehabilitation in a more immediate manner. So we chose to focus on those 3 for the study.
Thanks, Gagan. Second question has to do with the why does the study not deal specifically with projected traffic volumes and strategies? I think that they're talking about the Oak Park Road extension study because traffic volumes and strategies related to that. I think the question is, I'm interpreting a little bit here, but how does it impact this study? More specifically, widening the Lorne Bridge and or upgrading the Veterans Memorial Bridge would seem to be strategies to mitigate traffic issues and lessen the requirement for the OPR bridge. Does Gagan, do you or Jack want to comment on that?
I'll take that one. So the study specifically focused on the 3 crossings over the Grand River, namely Lorne, Brants Crossing, and the THNB Crossing bridges. As Gagan mentioned in the previous one, that they were identified as requiring the structural repairs and are critical in accommodating all modes of transportation in and out of the downtown area. The purpose of the study was primarily to assess the deteriorating condition and age-related concerns of these structures and to examine alternative solutions to maintain or improve the pedestrian and cyclist and vehicular connectivity needs to accommodate growth of the community identified in the city's official plans, and which is also reflected in the transportation master plan. So this study has taken into account the future infrastructure needs for future active transportation, transit and vehicular travel as well, and which is all provided in the transportation master plan, including the need for, as mentioned, the OPR extension or similar alternative routes to divert through traffic from the downtown area to relieve some of the capacity issues that for the existing road network, including the Grand River Bridge. In evaluating the alternatives to improve the active transportation connectivity in the area, the option to widen the Lorne Bridge was explored, but not carried forward as the recommended approach due to the negative social and economic impacts. Also keep in mind that existing road network and the bridge are considered to be to currently operate at acceptable levels of service. So that was noted during the transportation study that we did, just focused on the study area. We've noted that while the rehabilitation of Lorne Bridge is the recommended solution, it will eventually require replacement. And at that time, the bridge could be widened to accommodate dedicated cyclist traffic, additional traffic lanes, should the road network also be upgraded to be able to handle that additional traffic. And the detailed analysis will be done under a larger study, such as the continuous updates that occur with the transportation master plan for the city of Brantford. So I think that covers the question.
Okay, thanks, Jack. You addressed this in your presentation. There was another comment about Brants Crossing and when that would be opening. Just to elaborate, it's a real tourist attraction as well for many within the city as well, not just visitors, but many people in the city enjoy it, and very anxious to have it, the city fix it so that it can be back to its natural state. It's a beautiful historic piece of our history and needs to be restored. Do you want to comment on that a little bit further, or just reiterate some of the points you made in your presentation?
Sure. So to reopen it, a minor rehabilitation is required. So there are some repairs that are required to be able to make it safe to reopen to the general public. So in the short term, however, the condition of the bridge requires a more major overhaul or more major repairs in order to have that bridge remain open beyond approximately the 3-year sort of time frame. A major rehabilitation would be required to keep the crossing open for only somewhere between about 15 and 30 years. Given its age, rehabilitations have less and less effectiveness in extending the service life of some of the municipal infrastructure. After that, it's expected that the repairs would become, like as I noted there, the cultural heritage component of the study was also evaluated as a part of the social environment. There are several other environments that have to be equally considered, including flooding, the flooding and ice jamming events, the natural environment, and so forth. And also as noted, the preliminary recommended solution of replacing and raising the Brants Crossing be endorsed by council. The city of Brantford would then determine if fast tracking the currently recommended replacement alternative would be more beneficial versus doing a minor rehabilitation, which would more or less be an ineffective use of taxpayer dollars.
Okay, thanks for that. The next one's long, bit of a two-parter. So I'm going to start with the first part to break it up a little bit. While the bridges have a historical perspective, the future use of the bridges and that value to the city should be based on what the area will look like in 5 to 10 years. The commenter also says that Colburn Point downtown, the development will add businesses and people to the area. Numerous apartment buildings will be put up in the area, presumably, and Brants Crossing will need to improve. Would this be an opportunity to build a river park in that area?
I think I'll take this one as well, Cousin. So the EA was more focused on, or is more focused on, the condition and the age-related concerns of the existing structures, and considers the connectivity for active transportation, being pedestrians and cyclists, and also vehicles. It does consider recommendations from the Transportation Master Plan, which looks at growth out to about 2041. The recommended alternative for Brants Crossing Bridge that is included within the overall crossing strategy, so through all three bridges, was to raise and replace Brants Crossing to improve the active transportation facilities for both pedestrian only, so for dedicated pedestrian access or facilities, and also a dedicated cyclist facility, so that they could be separate and be safe for both types of users. And also the raising of the bridge would help allow it to, there's less chance for it to be in a prolonged period of downtime if it were damaged or hit by the water. So there's those different aspects to it.
The second part of the question was more exploratory and a bit of a comment about thinking outside of the box and other uses for bridges. Is that part of the study? One of the examples was that Ottawa has a large bridge where they actually use it for recreation. They do like dinners on the bridge and presumably use it as a destination to get from point A to B. Is that possibility something that is being considered as part of this process?
It could be, and that's a good comment to make, and something the project team will take back and look at. There is a bit of a constraint with the width of the bridge, given that the proposed alternative here is to reuse the foundations. So the foundations themselves have a current width, so trying to widen the bridge too much beyond what's there now would be more difficult. It could be something that we look at in the project study. I don't think there's, if there's more of a desire on that side, it could be looked at in more of the detailed design phase. So it could be noted in the EA, and then more discussion could happen during the detailed design phase of the project that would follow the EA.
Great, thank you. Another visitor to the Let's Talk Brantford platform said, I appreciate the opportunity to comment. I am one of many active cyclists that use the Grand River Trail system and the THNB Bridge as a safe way to cross the river for cyclists. I use it at least 3 to 5 times a week. In whatever solution that is chosen, vehicle isolated, accessible, plus convenient locations need to be considered. Please ensure that we do not lose our almost perfect trail system that we now know includes Graves Bridge. Is that something that you can comment on based on what evaluations have been done to date?
Yeah, can't comment on Graves Bridge. I don't know the details of that one too well, and that's covered, I believe, under the other study. However, this Class EA did consider transportation connectivity, as noted in the presentation, for vehicular and cyclists and pedestrians. And it was part of the evaluation for both the individual crossing alternatives for each structure, as well as the overall crossing strategy, so the combination of the 3 structures. The project team understands, specifically from a lot of the feedback that we received during and after the first public information center, that the importance of maintaining the active active transportation, connectivity in the area, and this is reflected in the recommended solution. So the recommended solution consists of rehabilitating Lorne Bridge, which there's constraints there to improve active transportation, except at the expense of vehicular capacity. But replacing and raising Brants Crossing Bridge and rehabilitating the TH&B Bridge, but ultimately removing it, would help with that. The Brants Crossing is the most desirable based on the feedback that we received throughout the project, but particularly right around PIC 1. And so widening that bridge from the basically only a pedestrian crossing to both a pedestrian and a cyclist crossing was key. So we're maintaining the connectivity that way, and it's also at a more desirable point. So we would expect more people to be able to utilize it, be more effective for the city as a whole. Yeah.
Great, thanks for that. One of the last, got two more. One is from Let's Talk Brantford and one is my own. So we're going to end with my own question. Next question was, how much does this environmental assessment actually cost?
I can take that one. That's a good question. So the approximate cost of the entire EA project is roughly $470,000. And I just want to stress that this was approved in the capital budget by council a couple of years ago to do this work. And the trigger for this EA was the age of the structures and the heritage value that they possess. So it is a legislated requirement that we're having to do this EA. And we wouldn't have been able to, do any of the major rehabilitative work or replacement without initiating this EA first.
Great, thanks, Guggen. And I wondered if you could just elaborate a little bit more on the timeline. I know you talked about when the study started and some of the major benchmarks that need to be met. When would the public see some significant difference physically as a result of this process?
Do you want me to answer that one there, Guggen?
Yeah, we both turned our mute off at the same time.
I can go to council if that's easier.
Yeah, so I can speak to that part, and then Jack, maybe if you want to talk a little bit about the construction stuff from your perspective. So the study is expected to be completed over the next couple of months, and we're expecting to go to council in June, either June or in the late summer. So that's when we're expecting the notice of study completion to come out, and a final decision to be made by council with regard to these three structures and the overall crossing strategy. So once we do get direction from council on the recommended solution and the notice of study completion is administered and the EA is officially completed, then we can begin the detailed design work for each of the bridges, depending on whichever alternative solution is chosen. And once the design is complete, that's when the next stage would be the actual construction. And Jack, in terms of the when the public might see construction activity, do you want to speak to that from an engineering perspective?
Sure. So I'll just add a little bit there. When we issue the notice of study completion, all of the background studies and the project report or the project file for this study would be released. It'd be reviewable by the public. They could read through the studies should they want to. So there's a period after that point. But following that, a lot of it would depend on council direction. Should council go straight through and approve detailed design, the Lorne Bridge aspect would be is more, and as noted in the presentation, it's more difficult to do. It's more difficult to do a rehabilitation versus a new design. You can control everything with a new design. With rehabilitation, it's a little more tricky. But for Brant, I guess it depends. And as one of the questions was in this period there, it all depends on whether the council decides that they want to, or council and staff decide they want to go and make minor repairs to Brant to get it open in the short term while the detailed design moves forward for designing the raising of the abutments and the new structure, getting the tender documents out, getting a contractor in place, and funding in the end. So to do the detailed design on Brant, it's probably about a year or so. So if everything went without any hiccups, you might see it in maybe 2023 or so. But again, it all depends on the processes in place to make the decisions, I guess.
Great, thank you both. And I know Guggen's going to close with some concluding remarks, but I just wanted to thank everyone that has gone to the project page on letstalkbrantford.ca and encourage people who are watching or listening to go to the page and join the conversation, provide your comments. I promise you that they are getting read. They do not get lost in cyberspace. They are tracked, collected, read by communication staff, and shared with the project team. And the project team will make all of the comments and questions part of the public record when they report their findings back to council. So please keep the comments and questions coming. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maria. Just to close, thank you all for your questions, comments, and feedbacks to date. As Maria said, we are reading it all and very appreciative to everybody who's trying to get involved in the process. This is an important part of our evaluation process, and as mentioned several times tonight, the feedback is going to be taken into serious consideration and be part of the project file at a later date. So before we adjourn, I just want to notify everybody watching that this information session after this information session, we still have 2 weeks to submit any questions, comments, or any feedback that you might have on anything that you heard today. There are several ways that you can submit comments and any feedback. So as Maria said, we have our Let's Talk Brantford page, specifically on the 3 Grand River Crossings page on Let's Talk Brantford. You can submit them through there. You can give us a call. You can email either Jack or myself. You can send mail to the city of Brantford, or you can drop it off in our City Hall Dropbox. And a reminder that this meeting is going to be recorded and will be available to watch later tonight. It's going to be available on the city's YouTube page. So as Jack said earlier on in the presentation, the next steps are for city staff and GM Blue Plan to compile all of the questions and comments that we've received to date. And we will be preparing a frequently asked questions document and post that on the project webpage as well. So on behalf of the city, the consultant, and everybody watching, thank you for participating in the process. We're very appreciative of you giving us your time. The information session is now adjourned. Thank you.